for what's to come, what Christ is about to do. And you said it best. He commissioned his disciples and his larger church to do his work.
Yes.
You know, the Great Commission, if you want to look at it from an unorthodox standpoint, is being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. Be my extension. Yes, go for it. And we go in his name. We go in his authority. He says, whatever you loose in heaven will be loosed on earth. Whatever you bind in heaven will be bound on earth. Like he says all these things, that Jesus has ascended into the realm of the heavenlies. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father, which is the biblical position of full authority. All authority has been given to him. And yet he turns to these 12 fishermen and says, all authority has been given to me, and now I share it with you. It's powerful, you know, for us, that the boldness that we have and the real sense of participation with God in this mission that he's allowed us to be a part of. That's humbling.
Yeah, it's very beautiful, man. I could talk about the Great Commission all day long.
All right.
So my next question is this.
Yeah.
How does the Great Commission apply to the church? Now, you can look at this from a very specific standpoint. You can look at it from the local congregation. You can look at it from the presbytery. You can look at it from a denomination. So how does the Great Commission apply to the church?
One of the ways that I typically talk about this, I use a quote at the beginning of this article that I use frequently when we're talking about missions, from Christopher Wright, who says that mission was not created for the church, but the church was created for mission. And I think it's a really important distinction, because oftentimes we do think of missions as a program of the church, right? And so we would separate out, and we would say, well, we've got a children's program, we've got a youth program, and we've got a missions program, which means that a portion of our money is being spent to raise up some missionaries and send them overseas to do the work of missions. And I would say that Chris Wright is much more on par with this, in which we're saying, like, if sin had never entered the world, the church would not exist in the way and in the function that it does today, right? We would not have a difference between those in the church and those outside of the church, the elect, the non-elect. God would have created his people. We would still be living for all of eternity with him. And John Piper says a similar thing. He says mission exists because worship doesn't. I mean, the purpose of the church is first and foremost to engage the world so that they might know God. I think we forget that sometimes with our language about it when we talk about and I'm not saying it's wrong to have a director of missions or wrong to have a missions program, but that kind of semantics can begin to seep into the pews in such a way that it becomes a line item. And who are we going to support? Who are we not? And not seeing that the totality of why the church even exists is not to gather people every single week for fellowship. That's important.
Amen.
You know, to do communion together. That's important. To preach the word. That's important. But all of those things need to point towards mission. They need to be pointing towards the fact that we are the means by which God is going to reconcile the world to himself. That's why the church exists. And so everything that we're doing week in and week out needs to have that sort of focus to it. And I think sometimes that gets turned on its head, and we think more in like an attractional model or something like that, where we distance ourselves from feeding the sheep and all this. So I'm super glad you're doing the beauty of the local church. And I know you just had Paul on here and preparing for worship, and you got other great speakers that are going to kind of speak about the many facets of what the church does. But ultimately, what Chris Wright is saying is that the church's primary existence, why it's even here on earth, primarily is for mission. And so I think breaking out of that mold and thinking just about overseas or just about door-to-door evangelism or putting missions in a box is an unhealthy way to think about it. So the relationship between the two is that's why the church is here. Church is here for missions.
Right.
Church is here to be, like you said, the hands and the feet of Jesus Christ in its local community and around the world. That's why it exists. So,
amen. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that my congregation does, and this is the joy of being on a session, we have this, I'm gonna call it a program. We have this this program where we support 10 missions, and we started off doing it was 10 by 100 by 1,000. Okay. And then over the years, obviously we redid it to fit our budget and everything. But what it was, we took 10 missionaries or 10 mission groups. Okay. And we gave $100. I think it was $100 a year to those mission groups. And it ended up being, I think, $1,000, when it's all said and done.
Sure. Okay. Yep.
Okay. So that was our way of saying, okay, we really want to support one particular mission group, but there are other mission groups out there that are equally doing the same thing that we're looking for missionaries to do. So why not we just support all of them? Like we have one of my members, his sister, she's like, I don't even know how old she is, but I know she is up there in age. And this woman literally uses her retirement to go and do missions to other countries.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Beautiful. So the fact that when she comes in, we give her the pulpit, we let her give us an update on what she's doing, and then we take a separate offering for her. But at the same time, we also give her $100 a year just to kind of help her with her missions.
Yeah, sure.
That's great. That is also the Great Commission.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna have Nikki Heisler on the show probably next week, and she's also a missionary. And we're going to be talking about some of the same stuff, and then how how can one support a mission of any type or something like that. So
yeah, good. That's excellent. Yeah. Good for you.
Okay, so the next question: what does the Great Commission mean to the missionary, and do they contribute to the church?
Okay, so for each, it's hard to give a blanket statement for every single missionary out there. What does the Great Commission mean for them? But I would say this. I would think about it more as the giving of the gifts to the church, and so less than the position itself. Like, I am a missionary, I am a pastor, I am a whatever it might be. I think it has much more to do with the gifting that God has given individual body members. And so when we think about the Great Commission, I do think there are certain gifts that have been given to those who have been called to that, that Peter had different gifts than Paul. And even Paul himself would say, I planted the seed, Apollos watered, And so they were missionaries, but missionaries of a different type. And so I think first and foremost, when a missionary thinks about the Great Commission, and myself as one who is a part of it, and again, all of us are a part of it, you play a role in it too. It's just that there's a faithfulness to the call in the same exact way that I believe that a pastor is called to a church, that a church planter is called to go plant church, a businessman might be called to play in this role in the kingdom. So every single one of us is playing a role. You might be called to be the best businessman you possibly can, make as much money as possible, and send as much money as you can onto the mission field. Support missionaries like us. Hugely important role. And that's what you've been called to do. Others of us. So even in mine is very specific. And I think that we're living in a day and an age where, in general, we've seen this, where there's a greater emphasis on specialization. And I think that that's true. We're in a really odd time in terms of the West's involvement in missions. Up until now, everybody has sensed throughout history it was going to be the West to the rest. That's the way they used to describe it, is that the gospel had come, and that we had the financial means and the Christian belief. We had the British Empire that was around the world, and in those places all throughout Africa and Asia, we were sending missionaries. Now, the great movement of the church is such that we've got the church just like exploding in places in the Southern Hemisphere. So all throughout Africa and whatnot. And in another 10, 15 years, we're going to have even more believers in China than we do here. Who knows? And so I think today it means different things. We're sort of thinking about it in terms of everywhere to everywhere. And so as a missionary now, my specific calling has been to use the gifts and ability God has given me in academia to go and equip others who have a certain call for that. So that's my sense of it specifically, is that every person has a part to play. And it goes back again to what I was saying, that Chris Wright is saying that the mission wasn't given to the church was given a mission. And so every single one of us from beginning to end, was created with a purpose, good works that we're intended to do before the foundation of the earth. And this is mine. And you have a role to play in missions too. So I would like to say that every missionary is thinking that, that to the missionary, it's a sense that I have a role to play. And mine might specifically be get on a plane and go overseas. That's true. But I think what we've done in the past is we've only allowed that to be what a missionary is. That's what a missionary is. Okay. Is the person that we support who gets on a plane and goes overseas. And in some ways, it sort of lets everybody else sigh a breath of relief, and we're off the hook. Like, well, that's good that they are doing the Great Commission, but this podcast is doing the Great Commission. You're doing the Great Commission. We are part of the Great Commission together. So I'd like the EPC, I think, is increasingly, I hope, like helping others to think through that in that kind of way. It's not just those people that are staying on the stage. They have a certain role to play in the Great Commission, but those who are standing on the other side, praying for them, supporting them, blessing them, commissioning them, going in their authority, they play a role as well.
Yeah, that's something that I can tell you right now. Case Tharp, our moderator, is definitely working on, and especially with the Revelation 7-9 task force. You know, we're working on a local level, if you will. And when I say local, I mean within the states. We're working on that in a different way. It doesn't mean it's not part of the Great Commission, because if you look at our theological statement, there are 2 verses that back up our main verse. We'll get to that later.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it. All right. So what is, and I'm going to say the English version, and I want you to give us the, I guess that's Greek version, for example, Latin. Or Latin. See, I don't know what I'm talking about. So the question is, what is the mission of God?
Yeah, good. Yeah. I think, again, this is one of those things where you could ask 100 people and they'd have different answers on it. I think, again, we look at from the very beginning, what was God's purpose to create in the first place? Because if we just focus on it, sometimes when people are talking about the mission of God, they're talking about sort of present tense, what's happening now. God's the Missio Dei, God's mission is to restore all things to himself. I agree with that. I think that's absolutely true, but that's a small part of it, because the reality is that there is going to be an eternity after this world when things are all redeemed. And there was an eternity before this world where God was existing and he had a purpose, right? It wasn't just like all of a sudden he created and now thanks to us, he has a reason to live or exist or have a being. So God is forever and always in an eternal relationship with the 3 persons of the Trinity. And it's an overflow of that love where he says, I want to bring more people into this communion. I think that's the mission of God, is that God is always and has been in relationship and inviting others into relationship with him. So the Missio Dei, I mean, in terms of missions, it becomes a central part of that. We share the heart of God when we long to see other people in relationship with God, because that's the very heart of the Father. That's what he wanted from the very beginning. It's why he created Adam. It's why he created Eve. It's why when they bit of the fruit, he didn't just evaporate the earth and start over again. He longed for relationship with them, and even, went to the lengths of sending his own son so that he might not have the barrier any longer to having relationship with him. So that's the mission of God. The mission of God is that he would live in communion with his creation. Perfect harmony. God is love. I mean, all those things. I think it's hard in human terms, honestly, to think about it. That's the best I can do, because when we start thinking about a Trinitarian God and we start talking about eternity and we try to put into words what is God's mission, there's some sort of breakdown there, I'm sure. I feel inadequate to fully have the mind of God to say, well, this is exactly what God is up to. I can't even do that in my daily life, never mind for all of human history. So, but I would say, like, biblically, that's the picture we have of God. We have a pursuing God who's constantly chasing us to live in relationship with him and stopping at nothing with this reckless Hesed love, this sledgehammer of love that's going to continue to come after us despite our rebellion, so that at the end of time, we'll spend eternity with him.
Right. So, and I like how you said that part of the mission of God is like him longing after us. And then you stated, like, for example, you and I get excited when you and I both believe in God, and we both believe in the gifts that God has given us. Well, yes. I noticed something every time. I have had several of my friends that one of them was questioning his faith and wanted to try something different. And instead of me getting frustrated with him, and I think I've worked on him by God's grace, if you will,